This is World Business Report from the BBC World Service. I'm Sasha Twining. In today's programme, we have an in-depth report into Africa's first ever commercial biobank. Our big topic looks at the challenges and possibilities with collecting DNA and the possible medical breakthroughs that might come. Also on the programme, Apple TV enters the streaming world. How are they going to persuade viewers to switch on to them in an already contested market? Plus, we hear from the Vegan Society on World Vegan Day on how a niche market went mainstream.
We're seeing a lot of meat alternatives being launched, dairy alternatives, so plant milks are being launched as well, to the point where the dairy industry are actually challenging vegan products for being called dairy-related names.
More on that later, but first, researchers across the world rely on a variety of samples of DNA to make groundbreaking scientific discoveries for all kinds of diseases. Africa is the most genetically diverse region in the world, yet only 2% of the continent's DNA is available for this research. In today's big topic, Ashionye Ogene reports on one biotech startup called 54Gene and how they are building Africa's first commercial biobank.
At the Sickle Cell Foundation in Nigeria, patients are being treated for a disease that affects millions of sub-Saharan Africans. At this clinic in Surulere in Lagos, I'm visiting Rebecca, who was diagnosed with a serious life-threatening form of the disease when she was 7. She's here with her mum for a checkup.
I will be very happy if they can produce the drugs that can cure it, so I will have rest of mind. When she's in pain, I will not happy.
Sickle cell disease is a serious and lifelong health condition. People who have it produce unusually shaped red blood cells, which can cause problems because they don't live as long as healthy blood cells, and blood vessels can become blocked. The life-threatening form of the disease is called sickle cell anemia, which is the one Rebecca has. There's no cure, and the treatment can be hard to access and expensive in parts of Africa. 54Gene is a Nigerian company that's working to find a cure for this disease and for others. It's building Africa's first commercial DNA biobank by gathering and storing samples from local hospitals. The company has already raised $4.5 million worth of investment, which is the biggest ever to date for a health startup in Nigerian history. Dr. Ashionye Ogene is the CEO and founder.
So 54Gene, the 54 there standing for the 54 countries in Africa, is an African genomics company. What we are doing is we are working with international organizations as well as local African institutions to improve the study of genetics research, which can lead us to understand the genetic basis of diseases, which eventually lead us to discovering new drugs that can be used to treat people of African origin and people who are not of African origin, so everyone.
So why is this research so important? The African genome is the most genetically diverse in the world, but at the moment, it makes up only 2% of the world's genetic database, which Dr. Abassi says, if 54Gene can address, will make a tremendous difference.
When you're looking at discovering new drugs or even understanding disease or new diagnostics, what is valuable is what you call genetic variation. Africa has the most genetic variation on the planet Earth. In fact, Africa might account for about 50% of the world's genetic variation. And then when you consider that a population of people or a region in the world has this much genetic richness, and yet only 2% of the genetic studies has focused on this population, it means that there is a lot that we are missing globally in terms of genetics research.
How does it all work in practice? I've come to the 54Gene lab to find out. A group of researchers and scientists are busy working in front of microscopes and a number of large machines. Dr. Zara Modibo is in charge of laboratory operations, and what I'm seeing here is part of their investigations into a cure for the sickle cell condition.
So over here right now, she's extracting on the Maxwell 16, so she's extracting human DNA from saliva samples, which we will be using biobanking. These tests that we're doing, they're bespoke to Nigerians because we're doing things like sickle cell. Sickle cell is known to be more common in West Africa. And if we provide that data that can help with discovery of drugs for sickle cell, now it's known that previously if a drug is approved by the FDA in the United States, for instance, it takes like 20 years before it gets here because it's done in the United States. So if we can be in charge of that data, we send the data, we get drugs discovered, then it gets to us faster.
Dr. Modibo's point is an important one. If drugs are being made and approved by the US Food and Drug Administration in America and take that long to filter down to Africa, then there can be some pretty major effects on people's lives. The study of human genes is not without its critics. Since the human genome was sequenced more than 18 years ago, we regularly hear of some genetic breakthrough being reported. But take a closer look and it seems that only very few have had genuine significance for human health.
Would you agree that so far, I mean, you haven't actually got the proof that it's all been worthwhile, at least as far as the practical application in medicine is concerned?
I think we're at the beginning of the curve, though. Maybe a couple of years ago I would have agreed with you more solidly. I really feel that in the last few years these new genetic-based medicines that have come out they've been pretty spectacular.
Back in Nigeria and other African countries, it's often the price of drugs and sometimes the use of fake drugs that can have a significant impact on the general health of populations. This is unlikely to change unless more drugs are produced locally, as the Chief Medical Director of Lagos State University Teaching Hospital, Professor Adetokunbo Fabamwo, explained to me.
So I think that sometimes when we see patients and we prescribe drugs for them, those that can afford the drugs may end up buying fake drugs, and quite a number may not be able to afford the drugs. So those are huge challenges that I see. And I think that going forward, the government must come to a state whereby we are able to provide the drugs for the patients at highly subsidized rates. If we get research done to identify drugs that are going to be of higher efficacy to our patients, and if we can get those drugs produced locally, the cost of those drugs will be much reduced. Until we're producing medications locally in Nigeria, the cost may continue to be outside the reach of the common man. Don't forget that the cost of drugs is denominated in dollars, and the dollar rates keep fluctuating all the time. So until we are able to do it locally, before we can get there.
With such a big need, it makes you wonder why it's taken so long to be addressed. Back in the 54 Gene Labs, Jessica Rich, the company's chief commercial officer, says that studying genes in Africa also has a wider benefit.
For Africa, really the benefit is being able to study genomic or the DNA from African subjects will help development of better therapeutics. So drugs will have hopefully a better efficacy in Africa and populations around the world of African ancestry, and also have better safety. Studying African genomics helps us understand the function of the genes in a little bit more detail than if you were only to study certain populations. So it helps identify targets for therapies. So the drugs can just be more efficacious.
This all sounds positive and promising, but what about the challenges? What hurdles have to be overcome?
Yeah, so some of the hurdles are really just building an infrastructure so that we can collect samples and actually have very good characterization around the samples. So really bridging the gap between other healthcare systems in the world and the current state of the healthcare system here in Africa, and sort of bringing that sort of to the same standard in terms of diagnosing and understanding disease.
Privacy concerns and use of data from the DNA samples which patients provide is also an issue, not just for this company and other researchers, but for individuals too. Take a closer look at the terms and conditions in consent agreements, and you will often find a clause which states that the company is not responsible for managing or deleting data which it has shared with other partners. Finding solutions to the medical issues, though, is something that can produce some interesting results. Here's Dr. Abassi again.
We are in an era where genetics is actually what is being used to discover new drugs. In fact, there are 2 drugs in the market now, in the UK, Japan, US, that were discovered as a result of mutations found in African populations. Interestingly, those drugs have not yet come into Africa, but they're being used to treat people of all races. That's how studies or having data like what were generated in Nigeria can actually help the global research community.
This may be an initiative which started in Africa, but the market potential for genomic data from this continent is truly global. Research that includes people of African descent could help health practitioners develop revolutionary new medicines here and across the world.
Ashionye Ogene ending our in-depth report. Now I'm going to give you an email address in just a moment because